friends, I'm super excited to add a new addition to our gamer series. We're gonna work on Pikachu today. You can open up your kit, get everything out that you need, grab yourself some water and a paper towel, and I'll guide you through how to paint everything step by step. So when you're starting to work on your project, it's absolutely fine if you want to keep all the paints in their containers. You can open them up and paint out of them, or you can also put some paints in your palette. We'll use this a little bit later on whenever we mix colors, but I am going to guide you through the best way I think it is to paint the project. But of course, there's always room for creativity and doing things the way that you would like to, because you and I are not the same. Normally when I paint, I always like to start with the background and move forward. So I'm going to begin with my square brush. You'll notice you have one that is square and one that is rounded. We're gonna start with the square brush. Hold it really nicely like a pencil. You don't wanna hold it back here. You don't have control over it. So slide it all the way up. And if you would like to, you can paint just orange in your background. And you might notice that my drawing looks different than yours. That's because I like to paint on paper. I make sure that you get the canvases. So you can paint this just orange if you would like to. It'll look amazing for sure. Or if you would like to, you can use some of your yellow and you could make a little bit more of like a choppy looking background to it. Or you could also do the same thing with white. So I'll show you some examples. When you're painting the background, if you'd like to paint it straight orange, that's a great option. I always like to trace around my image first. So if you're a younger artist and you'd like someone to help you do that, they absolutely can. Inside the background, I like to make it a little bit more dynamic, to make it look like Pikachu's moving, or maybe explosions are happening or something's moving quickly. Sometimes without washing my brush, I'll dip into another color and I'll make kind of these X's so that my two colors blend together just a little bit. So I can switch between making these X's with orange and then adding some yellow to these X's as well. And you could do the same thing if you want to with white. This background area right here, I could take my orange, kind of outline around my Pikachu character first. And I could do the same thing where I'm putting orange down. And then when my orange runs out from my brush, I could switch to white and kind of make this really cool whitish orange color and just make it look a little bit different, a little bit more dynamic. That would be for a little bit more of an advanced artist. But like I said, you are more than welcome to just paint the background in straight orange. Nothing wrong with that. You can do it differently than how I'm showing you, absolutely. You will have enough paint to be able to make the choices that you want to with your background. And while you're painting today, one thing you want to make sure you do is you want to paint the sides of your canvas too. It always makes your project look nice and finished and wrapped around. So don't forget the sides and tops and bottoms while you're painting also. So we're going to do our background first. I am going to mix in some yellow with it just to make it look a little bit more interesting with some of these nice big swooping X's. Sometimes artists do little circles like this to make it look a little bit more dynamic, but it's just to kind of give your eye something else to look at instead of just the plain orange color. I'm gonna paint over this area that I had some white examples started to make it all the same. I like things to be the same and kind of even on both sides, but we're not the same person. So if you want yours to look different, you can absolutely do that. I always outline first and then paint in the rest. And our little Pikachu is kind of poking in from the corner, so I don't really have background right here. And you might notice that I am constantly turning my paper because I always like to paint close to myself. I don't want to stretch way out far past my wet paint and way across the canvas. I always like to keep what I'm working on right in front of me because I have more control over it. So I'm gonna mix in some of that yellow, make a yellowy orange. And I'm using my square brush the whole time because I'm doing a big space It's easier for me to cover that quickly. And like I said, I'm not going to the edges because I am using paper, but you want to make sure that you paint the edges because it'll make your project perfectly ready to hang up on a wall. Because of course, when you're done with this, you're going to want to hang it up and show everybody how awesome it is. So there is my nice bright orangey yellow background. And we're going to wash our brush out. So you're going to put your paintbrush to the bottom of your container, give it a little wiggle around, and then we also want to dry it off, because if we don't, we'll have kind of watery paint oozing all over the place. So we're going to dry that off. And the next thing I'm going to work on is painting in Pikachu. I just want to be careful that I don't bump orange and kind of mix it into my color. So you could take a break and let this dry. You could have a grown-up dry it with a hair dryer if you want to, or you could just be really careful that you don't bump into each other. And I'm going to trace around a couple things first. So I know that Pikachu's cheeks are red, so I'm not going to paint those in. I'm going to paint around them and leave some empty space for that. I'm also going to paint around Pikachu's mouth. Oh, he looks like he has a silly goatee. I'll actually do the inside of his mouth, because the inside would be kind of the same color that he is. But I'm gonna paint around this nose and kind of the tongue, paint around the eye area. And if you make a mistake and accidentally paint into an area that you didn't want to, that's fine. We'll have a chance to go back in and fix it a little bit later, because we're using some darker colors. So because yellow is a light color, you can paint over top of your pencil lines. We will go back into those a little bit later on with a black so that it really stands out. So I'm going to kind of shift my picture, and I'm going to continue working on the face area, looking to smooth out any globs. Look, I just said to be careful to not go over the nose in different parts, and I accidentally did, so it's fine. We'll fix it up a little bit later. That's gonna be black anyway, so we always save black for the end so we can make sure it covers over any parts that we accidentally painted into. So when we paint, you want to be careful that you don't have big things like this, these big globs. You want to make sure you're smoothing those out. They take really long to dry, and it's kind of a waste of paint. If you have extra paint whenever you're done with Pikachu, you could absolutely use it for another project. You could do another picture of Pikachu, since these are colors that go well with the character. Or you could use them on another project if you want to. Something really easy that these paints work great on is if there's some rocks even outside that your family members would let you paint, you can do something like that and put them outside and display them. So I'm gonna work on continuing to do the body. And like I said, it is perfectly fine if you paint over these pencil lines, because we will trace back over them, because that's kind of all the different areas that's kind of defining his hands and his tail. And these little tips will be black up here, so that's why I didn't paint the entire ear. Really looking to smooth out those globs. And again, if you want an adult to paint the edges for you like this, and then you can paint the inside, that's a great way to kind of practice having control over your brush. And we're gonna paint in the rest of his tail. If I'm going too fast for you at any point, you can definitely pause it. Or if I'm going too slow, you can always skip ahead to see what the next couple things are, so you can be ready for the next parts too. And you don't have to do this all at once. You can absolutely take your time and do it over a couple days or a couple hours and let it dry and come back to it. So like I said, I could let this dry, come back to it another time, and just hit play again whenever you're ready. But I'm gonna switch over to white next. I'm gonna do a couple little areas that are white. I'm gonna switch to my smaller brush, and you might be thinking like, well, why would I paint this white? It's already white on my canvas. But this paint will dry with a little bit of a shininess to it. So if you just left the inside of the eyes without painting them, they would look kind of flat. They wouldn't have the nice shininess to them that the rest of your paint has. So these two little areas inside the eye are white, and we are going to paint that white. And you can paint over your pencil line a little bit if you want to. And we're actually gonna go ahead and work on the tongue area next. So our tongue is pink. So we can, with our palette, you could take some white, scoop a little bit of white in there. I'm gonna take a little bit of this red, because red and white mixed together make pink. And I'm gonna make a color that I think looks well for the tongue. And it could be light pink. If you have a lot of white, it'll be light pink. If you want to add more red, the more red you add, the darker it will get. So you might want it to be just a tiny bit lighter than the red cheeks that he has. So maybe you want to add more red to it, but you can control what you want this color to look like. The more red you add, the more dark red, kind of darker pink it is, and the more white you add, the lighter pink it is. So I'm gonna use this little brush. I'm gonna trace around where I'm painting, because I'm gonna let that kind of be a little area where I know to stop. So I'm gonna outline that first, and then I'm gonna paint this in. This is his tongue. And then I'm going to wash my brush out and switch over to my red next to do his super fun little cheeks. I'm gonna outline those first, trace around that, and then paint it in. Since we're doing smaller areas now, I'm using a smaller brush. It's kind of my detailed brush, so that I'm not putting too much on at a time. I can control it a little bit better. I'm gonna turn my picture, always trying to paint close to you and trying to make sure that you're kind of pulling the paintbrush towards yourself. Your paintbrush should never look like this and be all scrubby and scratchy like he's having a bad hair day. So make sure you're pushing, and you're not pushing, but you're pulling that paintbrush close to you. And now we're gonna do the last color. So this is where I would highly recommend waiting until your paint is dry, asking a grown-up if you can use a hair dryer, because once we use the black, we don't want to accidentally smear anything else. We want to let that dry so that we can have a lot of control over it. So this will be black, the little part of our nose. Circles are always hard because it's hard to make them perfect, because you're using a paintbrush and it's hard to have control over it to make it perfect all the time, but we're gonna try the best we can. And if something happens and you accidentally paint over top of the white eyeball, you could always let your paint dry and put the white back in, that's okay. So we're gonna do those eyes. And one thing that's a little trick too is that we could totally let our project dry, and with some of the lines that we're gonna do a little bit later on, we could even use a Sharpie if you happen to have one at home. That way you can kind of draw lines back on instead of paint them. The last part that we're gonna fill in with black is kind of the tip of our ears up here. And you can even wrap that around the side of your canvas. And our very last step will be outlining. And that's where you could choose to really let it dry overnight and use a Sharpie if you want to. I like to outline almost everything, especially something like this, to really make it pop. So I am going to take my little tiny brush, a little bit of paint at a time, and I'm going to trace my pencil lines. And it can be a little tricky. So if you would like a grown-up to help you, like I said, if you want to wait until you have a really dry project and you want to do this with a Sharpie, you can, but we're going to use our really, really tiny brush for this. And you can outline all of it, or you could just outline the pencil lines so we can see them. It's completely up to you. It is your project after all. And if there's anything else you could think of adding, you can do that too. I'm keeping it really simple. but you can be as creative as you want to be. And if you have other colors at home or different things that you want to add, maybe you have a space at home that you have lots of cool art supplies and you get a chance to use different things, you can absolutely bring different things into your project if you want to. This is just kind of a starting point for you. And you can notice again that I'm still kind of twisting and turning my paper, but you can turn your canvas so that you are making sure that you're always working close to you. Just makes it easier. And these little pieces down here, these little fingers can be hard. So this would be a good spot if you're wondering where to use a Sharpie. That might be a good option for you down in these little fingers right here because they're so itty bitty. So we're excited to add Pikachu to our gamer section. We'll be working on new things every month, kind of adding new kits as we keep going. And not all of them will always be on canvas, but it is a cool thing to be able to learn how to paint on a canvas and follow some stuff step by step. So when you're all finished with your awesome Pikachu painting, we would love to see it. So make sure when you're done, you take a picture of it and tag CurioCool so that we can check it out and see your awesome piece for yourself. Thanks.